This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we've got a chilling new announcement from Donald Trump, so I'm going to read a small section of this and then get your reaction to it. And that is, Trump went to Truth Social and wrote, "We must expand efforts to detain and deport illegal aliens in America's largest cities, such as Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, where millions upon millions of illegal aliens reside. These and other such cities are the core of the Democrat power center, where they use illegal aliens to expand their voter base and cheat in elections." And he goes on to speak about more. But what did you take out of this paragraph in particular? Because Donald Trump does invoke this idea of undocumented immigrants and cheating in elections.
Yeah, look, this is chilling because Donald Trump is laying the groundwork to prevent us from having free and fair elections. Look, we're going to have elections, okay? So no one should think that Donald Trump can cancel elections. He can't, and states run elections. But what he can do is put himself and the federal government in between voters and their ability to cast ballots that count. Now, this is not a new thing for Donald Trump. Remember, after he won the election in 2016, that's right, after he won the election, he actually said that illegal immigrants cost him the popular vote, which, by the way, he lost by 2 million votes. He actually said he would have won California, which I believe he lost by 4 million votes. In 2020, when we saw him contest the outcome of that election, Rudy Giuliani was dispatched to claim that there was fraud in big cities. And in Arizona, he said that Donald Trump lost because of hundreds of thousands of non-citizens voting. Okay, this has been Donald Trump's playbook from the beginning. And also remember, after the 2020 election, he mused about whether he could send the military to interfere with the counting of votes. He wanted the Department of Justice and the FBI to potentially seize voting equipment. This is serious stuff. And this is Donald Trump's way of using the immigration issue as not just a way to, trample on civil liberties, not just in a way to trample on federalism, not just in a way to flex his dictator and authoritarian wannabe streak, but also to put in place the next steps, if he wants to and feels like he needs to prevent free and fair elections.
Well, building on that, if he is trying to enact this plan where he gets the military in place so that he can then have those people there if he wants to, federalize these voting machines or do whatever it is he wants to do, is he kind of enacting this plan too early? Because isn't there some limit on how long he could keep the National Guard or American troops in these cities before their time runs out?
Look, I think Donald Trump's view of executive power is that he is the president and the entire executive branch has to answer to his beck and call regardless of what the law is.
Right. I'm sitting here deferring to won't he listen to the norms? Won't he defer to the law? This is a guy who's broken the law God knows how many times.
Right. And he views himself as the commander in chief, and therefore the military does whatever he wants. If he wants a parade that rips up DC streets that no one attends, he gets his parade. If he wants to send Marines into Los Angeles, I mean, just let's not pass over just how absolutely outrageous that was and that is. That Marines are sent to a city in California, the largest city in California, the second largest city in the country, and the legacy media is kind of like moved past it. I mean, that's right. We've moved past the federalizing the National Guard and moved past the Marines, and so by the time we get to a year from now, will it be now just kind of like, oh, well, yeah, there are active duty military in cities, or there are National Guardsmen, or there are ICE agents and FBI agents, doing this? Like, it is remarkable how quickly the legacy media normalizes this kind of activity.
All right, so given how important it is that we're able to prevent his ability to send the National Guard to all of these other cities, because again, he's going to use this as a pretext to be able to use them to do whatever meddling he wants to do in the 2026 or 2028 election, can you speak about the importance of the ongoing lawsuits right now? Gavin Newsom had gotten a temporary restraining order in the trial court. That TRO was stayed in the appeals court, but now we're waiting for some decision from the appeals court panel, which is 2 Republicans to 1 Democrat. But It's also worth noting that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, if they do seek en banc review, regardless of what happens with the panel, that is 16-13 Democrat to Republican, and so it is a more favorable full bench if they do seek an appeal there.
Yeah, look, that case is critical because Donald Trump's view, if it is allowed to go forward, it has no limiting principle. I mean, if ultimately the President of the United States can declare a rebellion or an insurrection or the need of to deploy federalize the National Guard or deploy the U.S. military, and it is not reviewable, that it's just basically whatever he thinks, well, that just has no limiting principle. He can do that in every community in this country. I mean, Brian, I don't want to turn this back on you because you're here to interview me, but, you live in Los Angeles, and I've talked to a lot of people from California, from Los Angeles, and the level of disruption, both in terms of number of people and geographic, is so small relative to the total size of LA. And the ability of the Los Angeles Police Department to handle it. It's not like the LAPD feels like outgunned or pinned down or, is like the governor is calling up the president being like, we can't handle this. I mean, the way this is described to me is this is like one small dot in an enormous city, in an enormous state.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. I mean, the notion that this is any more significant than any other protest is a complete joke. I mean, it is a couple of city blocks downtown where the vast majority of Angelenos don't live anyway. I mean, we have the most sprawling city. We have the most sprawling big city in the country. I mean, it will take you hours to get from one end to the next. It's not like New York where it's just a couple miles from top to bottom. And really all of this is concentrated in just one area. And you don't even have to take my word for it because the police chief for the LAPD himself has said that there was no need for the National Guard or certainly the U.S. Marines to be able to be sent in, that was a last resort and we're nowhere near there. And look, the police chief for the LAPD is no crunchy liberal. Like he's not there, he's not out there marching alongside the BLM protesters, right? And yet even he was able to come out and say that there was no need for the National Guard to be federalized and for the U.S. Marines to be able to be sent in, and yet here we are.
Yeah. And I think it's not a surprise that he started with Los Angeles because, like I said, going back to 2016, he was obsessed with the fact that he believed that he lost California because he believed falsely, I mean crazily falsely, that there were all of these illegal ballots cast in California, particularly in the big city, Los Angeles and other Democratic-controlled areas of the state. And we saw that play through in 2020. Like I said, not just in Arizona with Rudy Giuliani, who, by the way, was disbarred in part because of the lies he told about non-citizen voting. But remember all the crazy allegations they made about Philadelphia and voting there, and Detroit and voting there. And so Donald Trump has viewed cities as his political Achilles heel, and he is terribly worried about what it means in 2026 if Democrats take control of Congress, whether it's the House, the Senate, or both. He is frantic about that. And so I don't think this is an accident that this appears in this social media post. And after watching him in Canada, it's clear it wasn't an accident.
Yeah, and we're going to get to the Canada clip in just a moment, but one quick note on what you said. Even leading up to the election, Donald Trump had spoken about his plan for Schedule F and Project 2025 and his ability to be able to turn civil servants in the government into political appointees. And so my worry was that, okay, now all of these lifelong career prosecutors who populate the DOJ and the FBI, the folks who would normally investigate election crimes in the FEC and whatever it may be, those people are all there and their adherence is to the Constitution and to the law. When he's able to kick those people out and replace them with political appointees who are loyal not to the Constitution, but rather to Donald Trump. My worry is that when we have some bogus claim of election fraud pop up in Milwaukee or Detroit or Philadelphia, to your exact point, like we saw in 2020, that instead of being able to write this stuff off as nonsense, as the nonsense that it is, Donald Trump will now have people in place to be able to validate these bogus claims and say, you know what, there was fraud in the the main voting center in Detroit. There was fraud in Philadelphia. There was fraud in Milwaukee. And now, not only will he have political appointees in place via Schedule F, but he'll have the military in place by virtue of being able to deploy them under the pretenses of there being some like rebellion or invasion or whatever excuse he uses to do that. And so do you have any concern here that it's not just the fact that Schedule F employees will validate these bogus claims of election fraud from the inside of the government, but that he'll actually have forces in place to execute his plans inside of the states?
I do. And like I said, I think that this is his earliest for this term, his earliest manifestation of that. Right. But I don't think it's his last manifestation of it. And like I said, this is what he wanted to do in the aftermath of the 2020 election. But he was told no by the likes of Bill Barr, of all people, right. Who, by the way, was himself no walk in the park. He was a pretty right. partisan Republican. But even he reached his limit. But the Jeffrey Clarks of the world, remember, Jeffrey Clark wanted to send a letter that would have caused enormous amount of trouble. Well, now, without any of those guardrails around him, without any protection from his worst impulse, in fact, surrounded by enablers, right. and this issue that Stephen Miller, cares so much about, you have this confluence of events that I think is quite the powder keg, and it may not be the worst of the worst, right? It may not be, like I said, we're going to have elections, so I'm not suggesting that he's going to undo election. He's going to be able to prevent elections, but even without the worst of the worst, just imagine what happens if the military decides to block off streets or to make it impossible to get to where polls are easily, or there are ICE doing raids and you have people with guns cordoning off areas, like or he declares, as you say, that the people handing out food and water in line, or pizza the poll, an event where people are getting free food, he declares those to be a rebellion or insurrection, right? You could imagine all of
and now instead of relying on police forces that will listen to a Democratic governor or a Democratic state legislature, now you've got forces in place who are there just that take their orders from the commander in chief.
Right, and that's why this lawsuit that you mentioned that Gavin Newsom has in California is so important, because it's not limited to the excuse that Donald Trump has come up with in this one instance, which has to do with illegal immigrants in this country, right? Once you open the door that he can simply decree that there is a threat that requires the deployment of federal resources and the military and the nationalizing of the Guard, like that doesn't have a limiting principle at the other end. And Donald Trump is the person who will take something beyond what people think it will be. And when there's no limiting principle, then you are akin to just having a dictatorship.
Right. And I actually do think the one of the most worrisome parts for me is that he's actually being strategic about how he deploys this, because he mentioned New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. These are all big blue cities within big blue states. So nobody is going to you're not going to have any opposition from within his own party. Look, if he deployed ICE to Miami or Austin, those are blue cities, but they're within red states. And so, if you start to mess with folks who are going to be, building houses or working in the agriculture sector, that's going to upset people, even in red states, because this is all a very unpopular agenda that he's executing right now as it relates to these immigration raids, but he's just focusing it solely on places where he's not going to rankle any feathers of any Republicans, and so it's only Democrats who are going to be impacted here. He's not going to impose his unpopular policies on anybody within the Republican Party. He's focusing solely to impose these policies on Democrats here, and so once he's able to effectively deploy these troops to these blue bastions in New York and LA and Chicago, well, now then there is some precedent to be able to do it in other places, because if he hasn't been shut down in a quick enough time in LA, New York, and Chicago, well, then he kind of will view that as de facto permission to be able to expand this policy elsewhere.
Right. And again, look at what he wrote. He describes this as democratic power centers. Now, why, if what he's interested in is enforcing immigration laws, does it matter that they are democratic power centers? Then he goes on to say that Democrats are using these non-citizens to, quote, expand their voter base and cheat in elections. Again, not about immigration, not about, the worst of the worst, not around crime, right? This is about saying that he wants to expand these federal operations in these blue cities because that is the heart of democratic power and because that's where democratic votes are. And I don't think it is a coincidence that in his mind, those two things are connected.
I want to throw a clip from the G7 today onto the screen.
Last night where you said you want ICE to really target Democrats.
Yeah, I want them to focus on the cities, because the cities are where you really have what's called sanctuary cities, and that's where the people are. I look at New York, I look at Chicago. I mean, you got a really bad governor in Chicago and a bad mayor, but the governor's probably the worst in the country, Pritzker. But I look at how that city has been overrun by criminals, and New York and LA, look at LA. LA, those people weren't from LA, they weren't from California, most of those people, many of those people. And that's a focus. Biden allowed 21 million people to come into our country. Of that, vast numbers of those people were murderers, killers, people from gangs, people from jails. They emptied their jails out into the U.S. Most of those people are in the cities, all blue cities, all Democrat-run cities, and they think they're going to use them to vote. It's not going to happen.
So, Mark, what do you make of the fact that even at the G7, where this should have nothing to do with internal politics within the United States, this is still the idea that he was focused on and a message that he was trying to perpetuate?
Yeah, look, once again, he is connecting the what he says are 21 million. It's not 21 million, but whatever. The influx of migrants in this country, he is connecting that not to immigration, not to, whatever other policies that Stephen Miller may want, but rather he is saying that these people are in blue cities, Democrat-run cities, and they think they're going to use them to vote. And then ominously, he ends by saying, not going to happen. Well, I ask you this. In our country, elections are run by states. The Constitution gives states and localities the authority to run elections, okay? In every state, it is illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. It's actually a matter of federal law that it's illegal, and every state prohibits it from happening. So that is a state function. What does Donald Trump mean when he says not going to happen? He means that he, the President of the United States, using the tools available to him, are going to prevent it from happening. Now, I will tell you, he tried to do this through an executive order a few months ago, and my law firm and I, we sued and we won to prevent him from trying to impose his will by executive order on states running elections. The Democratic Attorney General brought a similar lawsuit, and they won last week a similar case. But he's not done trying to project presidential power onto our midterm elections. And so it is time that everyone starts to focus on this. I know it feels like they're really far away. I know it feels like there's a lot of time to worry about it. But Donald Trump and the Republican voter suppression war machine is grinding away day after day after day. And we cannot dismiss this. I feel like, Brian, a lot of people, when you and I were doing videos, said, oh, it won't be as bad. Donald Trump, we survived the first term, and, he tempers, and, he's calmed. Or remember the narrative after the assassination attempt, he seems like a new person. And here we are, we were sounding the alarm, and now people are waking up to it. I'm telling you, this is going to be a real thing.
So I want to finish off with this because I know that people are going to watch this, and this is chilling stuff. I mean, this is, the thing I was most afraid of as we headed toward November of 2024 was the prospect of Schedule F being enacted, because that really allows him to attack the foundation of future elections, and without some foundation of free and fair elections, then that's how democracy falls. And so people are going to see this in an instance where, not only is he able to enact Schedule F, and he's trying to do that right now, and granted there's some injunctions and whatnot preventing him, but ultimately he is moving forward with his plan. Now he'll also have a literal army in place to be able to execute it in the states if he needs to. And so for folks who are watching who are, I think, justifiably concerned about this, what is your message to everybody watching? What can we do as this process continues to play itself out?
Yeah, so look, the most important thing we can all do is to pay attention to it and speak up. On Saturday, millions of Americans showed up and peacefully protested across the country. And if you think that doesn't matter, then you are mistaken. There is no politician on earth who is not sensitive to mass turnout and protests like that. And there is certainly no politician in American politics today who is. And you know who's the most sensitive? You know who is the person who has the thinnest skin and actually cares the most about public approval? It's Donald Trump himself. So the first thing we can all do is we need to stand up and be strong and be loud and be peaceful, but to make our voice heard that this is not okay, number one. Number two, we need to make sure that the normalizing of this does not take place. The legacy media is in full normalization mode. I mean, I was reading some of the coverage about the military parade and the No Kings protests and in some of the legacy news outlets, and I was just thinking, I'm almost ready to give up on them. I mean, I don't know why. Yeah. I don't know why I read them sometimes, just to have them present things in a way that is as both sides sanitized as possible. So right. we cannot let this be normalized. But most importantly, we need to have confidence in the legal system. We need to have confidence that the litigation that's being brought, the kinds of lawsuits that the governor has brought, the lawsuits that I've been involved in, the lawsuits that lots of others have been involved in, are going to protect our free and fair elections. And I have confidence that they will. Like I keep saying, we are going to have elections, don't worry. The question is how free or fair they are. And part of that is up to each one of us as citizens. Part of it is up to the lawyers and the courts. But I have a lot of confidence that if we all do our part, we will have free and fair elections in 2026, and Democrats will gain control of Congress.
Well, look, I think it's important to be clear-eyed about the risks that we're facing right now. And to your exact point, the legacy media has been virtually silent about the risks that are posed by Donald Trump being able to send in the military, into American cities. You haven't. You have been speaking out about this, and I think this video right here is a testament to exactly that. So for everybody watching, one more step that we can all take to make sure that we are focused on the issues that actually matter is to subscribe to Marc's YouTube channel, and that is Democracy Docket. I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. His and his teams are the voices that we need to elevate right now, because they are the ones focused on the issues that are most pressing, like the ones that we just spoke about. So again, if you're not yet subscribed, please make sure to subscribe. The link is right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.